to my podcast, eSTEAMd Women. It used to be called Silence, and then it became Innovation, and now finally women are more empowered than ever to use their voices to express what it's really like to strive and thrive in what often tends to feel like a very male-dominated world. I'm sure it hasn't been easy, but these women have really achieved and accomplished. They're truly esteemed women who have chosen careers in science, technology, and innovation. They're typically go-getters, alpha females, unconventional, hard-working, and maybe even just a little bit perfectionistic. But on the whole, they've really applied their talents and their skills to make a difference. That was certainly my own intention when working as a mechanical engineer myself. In these episodes, you'll get a chance to hear about some fascinating innovations, but you're also likely to be inspired and uplifted by the personal stories and experiences of my amazing guests. So let's hear it from my STEM sister and incredibly esteemed woman this week, Ella Podmore, MBE.
My name is Ella Podmore. I am a senior materials engineer and a huge STEM advocate.
Yes, you are, and I can't believe we've only kind of just met.
I know. It feels like I know you for all the incredible work that you've been doing out there for science and engineering. But yeah, our paths are only just crossing now. How bizarre.
Yeah, and I met you, or kind of learned of you at this year's International Women and Girls in Engineering Day. And I was like, oh my gosh, where have you been this whole time? But you've just done such an incredible amount of things. And it's kind of, on one hand, it's really reassuring that there are amazing women doing so much in the background, and they are sort of becoming very well recognized. Mm-hmm. At the same time, but it's like, where have you been? But I don't know, are you from an engineering background?
Absolutely, yeah. So where have I been? I guess I've been in the weird and wonderful world of cars, and don't get me wrong, I feel like there's a lot of great work and publicity around the likes of construction or renewable energies, these kind of big sort of buzzwords in engineering space. And I think I've sort of been doing my bit in the automotive industry, but it is fairly niche. But yeah, my background is materials engineering. So I did a master's of materials engineering at Manchester University, and it's kind of, the reason I got into it is because I adored chemistry, and it is quite heavily chemistry based. So I sit on that boundary almost, even though I am a sort of qualified engineer, there's a lot of science behind it. About 60% of my day is in the lab. So I guess I've been sort of in the science and a bit of engineering space, but in cars, which is way out here, which needs a lot of work, which I'm sure we'll get into in a bit. But yeah, there's still a long way to go to get the automotive industry as recognised, I believe.
Really, because I'm finding that the sort of the motorsport world is this very powerful community, but it's very close knit.
Right. You're absolutely right. And if anything, I think we should be breaking out of that. There's been very much a club feel that once you're in, and then you can rotate around teams, and there's a lot of familiar faces as you work, if you do go between companies and things like that, which makes it very difficult for young people to break into that kind of environment. It is, the teams aren't the biggest, and trying to get into a new environment like that, or to try and pick up the diversity of the workforce in that kind of environment, it makes it very, very difficult. But the automotive industry, I see a change in it. I mean, we can talk about motorsport and the publicity that gets. We talk about F1 and whoop to the race recently, by the way, McLaren, Lando in position 2. But if we look to the automotive industry as a whole, where we're going towards electrification or even autonomous technologies, I think we really need to break out of that stigma that it's just a certain person working for an automotive division and we're doing the same thing. What we're starting to find is that with battery tech, there's a lot of software involved. We're looking towards computer scientists. We're not necessarily staying in those traditional talent pools of mechanical engineers or automotive engineers. So it's an exciting time, but you're right to identify that looking into the industry.
So maybe that's what I'm picking up on, because, I genuinely mean it when I say I don't know how I haven't come across you. And, so there's not coming across amazing people like you. But then there's also this like flip side where F1 just seems like to be the most publicized form of engineering, because motorsport is highly entertaining. It's like really super cool. But it also requires a huge amount of engineering. I mean, it is
right
engineering. So it's like, what is this void that is like stands between knowing people like you, but feeling like the motorsport industry is actually like in our faces all the time?
Do you know, interesting point. And I think you, on your last question and statement of what you have observed looking into the motorsport industry, what you've observed looking into motorsport, is probably more along the lines of why it can be so public. We talk about the wonders that Netflix have done by bringing out documentaries, Drive to Survive and things like that. It has encouraged an influx of younger generations wanting to get into this type of industry. However, there is still a void because I think of the way it's perceived. So yes, this is the pinnacle of engineering, performance engineering, everything from strategy to actual technologies on the car. However, it's perceived as this club. I can't break into that. I don't know anyone who works in that kind of industry. I'm not an engineer. I know no engineers in the family. It goes so much bigger than that. And I think that's what we're trying to break down the boundaries of, trying to not make it an exclusive club. Actually, we need diversity in these teams now. But I think you are along the lines. I mean, if I did know the answer, I would probably be a millionaire or solved it, by now. But I think you're absolutely along the right lines, that this exclusivity or everyone knows everyone in this kind of sector needs to be shed.
It's a bit like becoming a pilot.
Right.
Because there's so much engineering in flying planes, whether that's building planes, flying planes, all the other sort of engineering around keeping planes in the air, or and yet it just seems like a bit of a private club as well, especially becoming a pilot. There's this kind of subconscious, it's really expensive, it's a lot of flying hours, it's a lot of like all these kind of limitations, which means that really becoming a pilot or a racing car driver is restricted to people who are in the know.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
it is fascinating, but I guess it's kind of why this work is so important, right? Which is why we've got to broadcast all the different variety of roles that we have in these sectors. Some people may be off-put, similar in a pilot sense, that I don't have good hand-eye coordination or something like that. Engineering wise, I'm not good at maths, I can't go into Formula One, or I can't go into motorsport. And we kind of need to shed that persona, because there are so many incredible individuals, both in the aerospace pilot side of things, but then also in cars, that we need legal teams, we need people who are love to code and things like that. It's not specifically these traditional talent pools that have been dictating these industries for so long. But it is fascinating when you get into the specifics of it and start to unpick like why people are put off with these stereotypes, and that's why we got to shed them.
I mean, in terms of your own journey, it just seems like everything, no matter which part of the motorsport industry you go into, it just seems massively competitive. How did you get into it?
So I'm thrilled that you asked this question, because it's probably not the answer most people would expect. And I love to talk about it because I want to show that there is no set way to get into anything, right? And I'm sure that you have come across a similar thing along your journey. So I work specifically with the supercars, even though we're all under one roof. there are elements of technology that are translated between the Formula One division and the supercars. And I talk about these vehicles or sports cars that you see on the road, right? Music videos, these kind of elaborate coloured cars. And we translate the technology from the Formula One team into the likes of cars people can own. And my journey started, I knew I wanted to be a materials engineer, very, very fortunate that I understood what an engineer did at a young age. And I was like, yeah, sign me up. I wanted to combine my love for chemistry and problem solving down this kind of avenue. And so I went on to study that at university, and cars are something that I enjoyed watching. I did watch a few of the Grand Prix, and I idolized Jenson Button, Lewis Hamilton when I was growing up. You know, I was passionate for the sport, but I never saw myself working in that space. And again, probably exactly what you're describing, if I'm not diehard McLaren fan or diehard Mercedes fan, then there's no way I'm going to get into this industry. However, I had the opportunity to take an industrial placement year, which I'm sure loads of students listening would be familiar with, where you can get anything from 6 to 12 months out of your degree, apprenticeship, and you can spend that working in a company. And I had a poster of a McLaren P1 on my bedroom wall. So that very exotic, one of the first hybrid supercars, probably 9 years ago. And I had it on my wall because I wanted to own it, loved it, watched it on Top Gear with my dad. It was something, you know, an item that it was like motivational factor. And I looked up at it and I was like, well, why don't I just try and see if they had an opening? I've got nothing to lose. You know, when you're in the rhythm, you're filing off applications, and I might as well write a letter to them. And I literally posted a letter with my CV, old school. We talk about LinkedIn, but I wrote a letter. And I posted it to them, and 5 months later, they got back to me and they said, right, we don't have a materials engineering division. However, we can see that you know quite a bit about cars, and it looks like it'll be an exciting opportunity for both McLaren and us. So they invited me for an interview. And within that interview, I was able to prove that I understood what a drive shaft was, but I didn't necessarily need to know the specifics of it. I can root cause analyze a failure if it went wrong, for instance. And this is kind of why I want to say, and obviously that was successful. And I spent 12 months with them. And off the back of that internship, I got a thesis topic, proved out the thesis topic, and they created a position for me here in advanced materials team. And that's where I've been ever since, 5-6 years later. Now, the reason that story I think is so important is, just to your point, not everyone needs to be absolutely obsessed with the sport or knows the ins and outs of every chassis component and powertrain component on the car. That's not true. There are so many different avenues in which you can get into it. But also, I wrote a letter. It just shows, you know, there are companies that need a little area of research or something that they haven't quite got the resource for, and you've got nothing to lose by writing a letter, an invitation on LinkedIn. There are ways to get into these companies, and if you pitch it right and understand what's missing, then you can end up with a position like I have done. So
it doesn't sound like you not only wrote a letter, but you actually invented a job for yourself.
Yeah, which is so ballsy. Reflecting on it now, I'll be like, I don't think I could do that now. But as students, you've got nothing to lose, right? And if you're passionate about your subject and you're willing to prove yourself in that kind of position and explore technology and I guess the automotive industry is a great example for that, where they're making leaps and bounds towards battery tech and autonomous sensors and systems. If you're willing to prove your dedication and excitement for exploring those things, then you've got absolutely nothing to lose.
It is so ballsy. In fact, I'm not going to use that word because that's kind of has
no, we don't like that. Yeah, what should we call it?
It's so badass. It's just, it's like strong, it's courageous, it's bold. It's bold. Yeah. It's really bold. And you know, you essentially stepped into a void that existed because you put yourself in a situation that didn't exist and you made it your own. I mean, that takes a huge amount of self-belief and determination and confidence. I've got so many questions. Let me go to one that popped up when you were describing that journey. How did you know that you wanted to be an engineer? Because that's not, I think we're still at a stage where people don't actually know what engineers do.
Right. I agree.
How did you know that engineering would be for you?
Yeah, I completely agree. So a couple of things. I grew up in an environment where neither my mother or father were engineers, but my dad was like, I call him a tinkerer. He loved to take things apart, and he was always forthcoming to me and my brothers on why mechanisms were there. If the washing machine broke, he took something out, he root cause analyzed it. And I loved seeing that very logical thought process of something's gone wrong, we can have a look at it ourselves and we can start to understand why those things are there. And it kind of gave me a very inquisitive mindset from early on. However, I do like to point out that, I do get questions from young girls in particular, but also young boys. They think, oh, I never really got my hands dirty. I was never in an overall, looking at things. It doesn't have to be that. And I wasn't that myself. I just sort of was like a why girl. I was like, why is that? Why is that? Why is that? Sort of getting to the root cause of anything. And that still makes a fantastic scientist or engineer. You don't have to understand or get really greasy in the application of it. And I knew when I was sort of working and looking at things with my father that I was like, okay, well, how can I do this in school? And I loved science at school, and I wanted to combine that science and then also this logical look at mechanisms and coming up with solutions or contributing to a problem or solving something in society. And it's that inquisitive mindset that really pushed me to understand what it was at school. And that's why I always say, regardless of what your passions are or what you really find fascinating, it always takes to be inquisitive, constantly want to build on the knowledge. How can you apply that to something that you want to do? And there will be a sector of science or engineering behind anything that you're passionate about, from musical instruments to fashion, whatever. And at school, I asked those questions and aligned my passion for chemistry with that engineering mentality, which I suddenly soon became familiar with. Oh, engineers do this. Engineers root cause analyze, they fix problems, they create solutions. And it was a combination of those two things. And I appreciate people have access to different career departments or different family friends or different networks and things like that. But the one thing that I can always say is having that inquisitive nature or wanting to build on your knowledge is always going to get you to the place that, you want to go to.
And so then next question, were you ever sort of dragged down by being in a minority or underrepresented in some way? Because I'm assuming you're one of very few women in motorsport.
Right. And further to our point, that we started this discussion with, automotive industry has a long way to go. I'm in a niche area of that with supercar technology. And we think about how big these companies like Nissan or Mitsubishi and Toyota are. When you go down to a niche like supercars, it's small teams. And yeah, I am in the minority. It's gotten so much better the last 6 years that I've been in this sector. But, preaching to the choir, we understand that there is a gender disparity in the STEM space. I think it was accentuated by the fact that, yes, I'm in the automotive industry, but also when I first joined a company like this, and you're sort of very, very few women, always the only women in the room, and being that young graduate in a position that I created, suddenly you're having to change business as usual protocol. People who've been doing they're doing their job for 10 years, right? And you're coming in, you're saying, actually, I think we should switch to this titanium. Suddenly there was like who is this girl? And why is she suddenly funny about what alloy grade we use, for instance? So, oh my goodness, was there a learning curve, like big character building or whatever. And reflecting on it now, I think the greatest sort of thing that I could say is that we're in a beautiful profession where quite often our presentations are facts and figures, right? All the work that you do on documentaries, and you're always presenting the facts, or like what the science is. And I think that was my greatest advantage, being in a high performance environment like this. I was always presenting what the science said. And sometimes if someone didn't necessarily agree with that or questioned my thought process behind it, you can always do a further test, or you can refer to literature, or you can display it in a different graphical format. It was always facts. And that's sort of, you know, a note for people who ever want to get into the STEM space, that you can always fall back on. That gave me the confidence. But then secondly, yes, you're in a spotlight, but use it. Use it, honey. Like, I've been in situations where I've been sent to women in tech conferences or women in motorsport conferences. Yes, was I taken there because I was a female engineer? Most definitely. Whilst I was there, did I smash it? And made myself really proud of the speech that I delivered? Yes, and things came of that. So there's a huge space for women in this sector at the moment, and I think you would be foolish not to use the opportunities that come your way. So use the spotlight. There will be one, but there are things you can do to use it to your advantage.
Gosh, that's such important advice, because often we can sort of wallow in the disadvantages rather than turning them around. But a burning question I have is, you mentioned brothers.
Yes.
How much were they an influence to gaining that confidence to be around boys? Yeah,
that's a good point, actually. I went to an all-girls school and studied, obviously, in a physics class with 16 other girls. I think my brothers did play a part growing up, you know, being familiar with, because I'm always an advocate that I think women and men think differently. Definitely. We take different approaches, different risks in how we approach a problem. And it should be celebrated and encouraged, if I can reflect on that. But yeah, I guess sort of playing in the Lego pit with my brothers and not being afraid to sort of say, actually, no, we should build it this way. Or the fact that they were younger as well probably did give me a lot of confidence in that kind of environment. Yeah, it's quite interesting.
Yeah. You say you do a lot of outreach, and the more I get to learn about you and see all the outreach you do, it's clear that you are really passionate about encouraging more underrepresented people, particularly women, into engineering. Do you come across women who are held back by things like sort of low self-esteem, low confidence, low self-belief, or is that like just a different generation or different group of people? Like,
yeah, it's a good question. I 1,000%. I come across students who have doubts. I myself always have doubts. You know, it's completely natural. It's part of the learning process. As you challenge yourself as an individual, there will be moments of uncomfortability, you know, and you've got to understand how you can assure yourself and gain confidence in it. I think quite interestingly though, and I'll be interested in your thoughts on this as well, when I go to schools and speak with students, primary school, there's a definite shift between primary school and secondary school, particularly with girls. So 9-year-olds, 10-year-olds, quite often when I ask what you want to do, and they'll be like, I want to create the cure for cancer, or I want to be an astronaut. And this kind of blue sky thinking is incredible. And I see it with boys as well, but more often girls. When you go to secondary school, we're talking 11, 12, 13 years old, there's a huge shift. And then suddenly it becomes quite visual as to what they can see. And more often than not, when I ask what they want to do, and they want to be big on social media, or they want to be an influencer, which is absolutely fine. But I'm fascinated what happens or what changes. And I think the more I sort of do this outreach work, it's hugely based on visualization, which is not a bad thing. But I think, you know, you and I have a duty to sort of say, like, okay, if we have a bit of a platform, how can we visualize important or groundbreaking STEM roles for people who want to make a difference? And if they want to make an impact on society, then there are other ways to do it in the likes of technology pathways, rather than just being sort of like an influencer or YouTube star. So the shift is an interesting one. I think that the confidence, definitely more so in young girls, whether that influences their decision, actually, I'm not sure. That could be a potential cause on why I'm seeing that difference between primary and secondary.
Yeah, I mean, you don't strike me as someone who has self-doubt. I say that with so much hesitation, because I think all human beings do. But you do strike me as being someone extremely resilient and kind of confident and kind of just full of self-assurance.
Oh, thank you. I've fooled you all.
I mean, is that your secret kind of sauce? Because I'm just trying to imagine people in the audience who are just very bashful and don't have that sort of real get up and go to basically invent a job for themselves for like a really competitive industry like motorsport. Like, what would be your tips?
Yeah. Oh gosh, it's such an important topic. I think when I first joined, honestly, talk about that character building phase, or starting to understand who you are as an individual and then trying to place yourself in a work environment, is so tough. It's so tough. And I just want people who are listening to this to understand that everyone has this, literally everyone. The best thing that you can do is start to understand yourself. So start to pick up on the signs, maybe on a bit of burnout, or when you're feeling uncomfortable, when you're talking in a meeting, what are the things that are off-putting you from putting your hand up or making a comment and things like this. But confidence-wise, I definitely had to align myself in that early phase with that science ethos that I was talking to you about, right? So when I got questioned, and my confidence got rattled when I had to make a big decision based in this new position, people were listening to me and they said, right, why would you do that? Why would you change that alloy? Or why would you spend X number of thousands of pounds in testing when we've never done it before? And that to me was my confidence rattler. I was like, oh my gosh, I don't feel good enough. And the way that I overcame that was by just getting my head down in my subject, which I loved. And it helps, of course, when you find that sector of science or whatever that you're so passionate about. Why am I having to do this? So I would often visualize things in a different way. Quite a lot of my work is microscopic, and when I'd show people a microstructure of a material, they'll be like, this is pointless, we've never checked this before, and then I would explain why we were doing it, always prove out the science. And once I knew that I got that right, and there were instances where I had to refer to an external consultant, or maybe in the race team, they have researchers there, I would look for a second opinion, because sometimes that validation gives you that confidence, right? And so once I knew I'd got that right, that gave me a little bit of confidence. And then I was like, no, I am doing this right. And of course, it all takes time, practice. You start to build up a reputation. No, Ella knows what she's talking about. And so now it's gone from a situation where I would have to really be like, oh my God, right, here we go, like put your hand up, I've got something to ask. It's gone from that to a situation where people are like, let's just get Ella's thoughts on this before we change anything. And so it all sort of works towards a better position with the practice you put in. Specifically on public speaking and things like that, I have talked about doing the outreach work. I have got a huge amount of confidence talking to students. When you sort of know I know this sounds weird, but when you sort of know, like, you are probably the technical expert in the room. when we're talking to like a classroom of 8-year-olds and you're talking to them about atoms or chemistry or whatever, you're like, I've probably got this. No one's really going to floor me with a crazy question here. And building on that kind of experience and you're getting your passion out by sort of talking about science, but then also talking to probably a classroom of about 30 8-year-olds, and that can grow bigger and that can grow bigger. Those audiences get bigger. Then learning from that teaching element, I really gained confidence, and I've seen it reflected in my day-to-day work here. The confidence of speaking in front of people on a student level, but then also rolling that out on the work level as well. There are so many ways to do it. I think the best thing to mention is practice, but then also start to understand what makes you tick, because everyone is different, and other things can offset your confidence levels or worries. And you just got to understand what that is and come up with ways that you can sort of challenge and build yourself.
Yeah, I mean, listening to you describe that really makes everything crystal clear, because just hearing you speak is so it's so powerful and inspiring, not purely because of all your kind of accomplishments, but because of your substance. Because I think we are living in a world where, especially with social media and things like that, everything can be reduced to a 2-dimensional image.
Right. Yeah.
You have that going for you. Like, it's really nice to look at and everything. But what makes you so powerful is actually your substance, and your confidence, I think, stems from that. It's like, I can really feel that you know your stuff.
Oh, thank you. But I must say, because the question I do get, I am not a hugely smart person, and I want to make that clear. Like, I love my subjects. I love being a materials engineer. I love that. But I wouldn't say it comes naturally to me. And I want people, girls and boys, or even people in the industry who are having those thoughts of, God, have I chosen the right subject? I haven't got to where I am because I'm hugely intelligent. I've just had gone through a few things in my career pathway that has made me start to understand what makes me tick as an individual. But then also, I think you discussed it earlier, resilience, and that fear of failure is something that I had to come across from leaving school, when you're in an environment where you've got to pass, you've got to get good grades, you've got to get this, you've got to get that. And you start to understand, build up resilience, thick skin of when you suddenly leave school, and then you're like, oh my gosh, that test failed, or a test that I'm running here failed, spent thousands of pounds and decided to go and chase this material, and it's all come crashing down. That fear of failure is quite crippling. And we need to build up students and aspiring engineers to think failure is a great thing. The minute I stepped foot in this place, they said, fail fast, learn quicker. Failure is a part of science, is a part of engineering culture, and understanding that was a big thing for me as well. But it does not take a smart cookie. It's just resilience and passion and drive for your subject.
Yeah, I love the fact that you're talking about failure. And I think that might be one of the reasons why engineering isn't as popular as, say, something like finance, which also needs maths, because with something like finance, it's almost like instant gratification, that you're making money, it's almost a given that an industry like that, you get the rewards quickly.
Yes.
Whereas with something like engineering, it's problem solving, and the problem part of it just feels so like, oh, I don't want to deal with problems. I just want to be succeeding and making money, and all the engineers I know, and this is why it's so inspiring speaking with you, have such a good relationship with failure. Like, it's not seen as a mistake, it's seen as an opportunity to grow and learn and evolve.
Mm-hmm.
And with that mentality comes this huge amount of empowerment, because you're not like tripping up on your failures, You're actually using them as stepping stones. I mean,
Yeah.
you're more empowered than that.
Yeah, I love that you said that. I wonder if, I don't know, that the environment that we're bringing students up today, I wonder if we sort of set ourselves up for a fall here, because it's so difficult to come out of school and be okay with failure or appreciate the positive elements of failure. That's what I think personally. I didn't go through an apprenticeship. I didn't really get that practical, industrial, hands-on learning experience. It was very much textbook, exam, lab, there was a bit of lab stuff, but it was only in that industrial placement year that I did that I realized that people fail, and it's the only way that we can really learn. So it's an interesting point. I'm definitely, there are areas that I still need learning with failures, especially with myself, sort of picking myself up after a blip or whatever. But I completely agree. Problem solving, does that make it about failure? We need to change that relationship and change the narrative on it.
Absolutely. And really, conversations like this are changing the narrative, because, you're saying that things don't always go according to plan. And that's exactly what is part of your job.
Yeah.
Learning from that. So massively like change making, that kind of mentality. But what's your plan then? Because you have been, the MBE last year, right?
Yeah. Oh, thanks.
Well, congratulations. And it's like utterly inspiring. Like where are you heading, personally? Because as a woman in what tends to be a very predominantly male industry, like it can be difficult to sort of plan your future without this influence of like not wanting to be left behind to do all the things that could do.
Yeah, it's such a good question. And, people don't actually ask me that. It's so, I'm so glad you've discussed it, because I have found now that I've thoroughly enjoyed myself as like a junior engineer, now a senior engineer, I've found there's actually quite a lot of pressure to make a decision, especially in the environment that I am in, to sort of make a step to a managerial position, or to cross over. When you're in sort of a corporate environment, it's like, okay, so you can be technical or you can move over to a managerial position. And I don't know whether that's because I love communicating with people. I would say I'm quite a people's person, but then suddenly it's like, oh, you've got to lead teams and stuff. And I was like, no, I love the techie stuff. This is, what I live and breathe. And so where I see myself going, definitely to remain technical. I would love to sort of get to a stage where we're really pushing R&D for material science at McLaren. At the moment, I'm sort of not firefighting, but obviously having created a new division, there's suddenly a lot of work that to sort of keep the performance levels as they should be. Going forward, I'd really love to sort of push what we're doing with conductive composites or battery technology, all of that stuff. I'd love that, and immerse myself in that kind of R&D element, but also that STEM outreach that we've discussed for so long today. That is a huge part of what I love to do in the engineering space. And I really would like to focus quite a lot of energy into parents and the parents relationship side of things. So I've done a lot of work directly with students, directly with teachers, and obviously seeing that firsthand, or taking a car, which helps, by the way. If you can bring a car along, suddenly it's like a bit of a Y factor. You're like, yeah, okay, do engineering. But having that discussion with parents, I think, is going to be my next thing. And I'd love to sort of, I don't know how I'm going to do it yet, but that parent child relationship, I think, has a big part to play with the kind of society stereotypes that are discussed at home. You can change someone's opinion, and a teacher can have a massive influence with a young girl or boy, but if they go home and their parents are very much, oh no, you don't want to do that, so and so does that and he wears an overall all day, those kind of comments can be hugely influential. And so I'd love to sort of work my next chapter on STEM outreach, on that kind of relationship, but who knows what that looks like.
What about sort of like this whole concept of having it all for you personally? Because, you know, not only do we need to have an impact on the educational system and how that sort of encourages more diversity into industry, but what about industry itself? Like, because you're embedded in industry, what changes would you like to see so that as a woman in engineering, you feel that you can have a career where you do have it all, not just career-wise, but also personally?
Yeah, that's $1 million question, right? I mean, I think, again, reflecting on the automotive industry, because that's where I am today, the pandemic has been quite positive, if you can say that. You know, it's had a positive impact on the way that a company like this behaves, but then also other quite traditional manufacturing companies have across the UK. And I think the big thing for me that I've taken away from that is flexible working, and how they have been almost forced into a position where they were like, right, okay, we either shut down completely and manufacture nothing, or we embrace the fact that we are going to have to set up systems and infrastructure to allow people to work from home. And once that was done as a way of coping with the pandemic, we suddenly realized actually this means that we can employ people who do have constraints where they need to be at home for X number of days a week, but also we can employ people with different skill sets from complete different countries and different nationalities and allow them to work on our products as well. And that to me has been amazing. You know, I've worked with people in different time zones who interpret our product completely differently. And when you are in a manufacturing position and you're shipping units to different regions, it's so important to understand how that culture interacts with that product, or how they work together as a unit. It's so fascinating, and I think that's been a positive step forward. I think there is a lot of work to be done in job descriptions and how we apply and attract talent to companies. That's something that I've noticed. We don't necessarily need to fulfill specific educational backgrounds, I guess. You know, if I were to apply to a job here and they specified you need 3 years, a 3-year bachelor's, in mechanical engineering, for instance, I'll be like, oh gosh, no, that's not me. I don't satisfy that. But actually, all they're looking for is a particular type of skill set from that, logical thought process, problem solving, things like that. And that could just be myself as a material scientist, but then also someone who's been through an apprenticeship scheme. They don't need to specify that kind of degree or educational background. And I think that's quite an old mentality associated with automotive, but then also in the manufacturing space. So those little things I would love to see change, and that can help from bringing women into the space, but then also attracting people from all sorts of different backgrounds.
Yeah, I mean, there seems to be more and more different ways into engineering. Mm-hmm. So for you personally, do you reckon your career path will allow you to satisfy all ambitions as an individual? Because, you know, there is this there has been, maybe it's outdated now, but a school of thought that, you know, certain industries just don't allow a woman to sort of like have everything she wants. So you kind of have to choose at some point. But are you in a place where you won't have to make sacrifices or choices? You can have it all?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't know. I view it as, and someone made a really awesome analogy to me when I was sort of going to these insight weeks as a young student and, you know, figuring out what you want to do. And I think being a woman, you're naturally quite aware of that. You ask the questions, you're like, how should we work-life balance? Which is so annoying because you probably wouldn't ask that to a man. But you sort of say that. And this lady who I spoke to, part of McKinsey consultancy, she was saying, I see it that I have a series of balls that I'm juggling at the moment. And my biggest skill, or what made me the greatest individual personally, both in work and personal life, was understanding out of the balls that I was juggling at that moment, which were rubber and which were glass. So which ones could she theoretically drop for a bit and they'd bounce up and they sort of pick it back up, or ones that were so crucial to your well-being that you couldn't drop and you had to prioritize. I completely get it. I'm a big advocate for women working and having a family if that's what they want to do, but there will come a time where you need to protect your energy, and I think understanding which you need to prioritize. But this can even be rolled out to, male counterparts as well. Like in life, you will go through situations where you need to put your personal life first. And I think understanding that from when you're a young professional and maybe, you've got people in good health around you and stuff like that, understanding how you can prioritize is always going to be a good skill to have. So I'm learning that at the moment. I think what I've done recently, do a lot of outreach, love my job. I've signed up to quite a few things to develop myself. I've done a project management apprenticeship, for instance, and I think that is great. I'm practicing what I'm preaching. I'm telling everyone that you need to sort of continue to learn. That's the beauty of the science and the engineering space. But I think I've definitely oversold myself in the last year. And so suddenly I'm like, okay, Ella, having like a 2-year apprenticeship balanced alongside all the sort of extracurricular stuff and the job was definitely a learning curve for me. So yeah, you can have it all, but learning to prioritize is going to hold you in great stead.
But you know what? I think we've come full circle, because from the moment we started having this conversation, I'm really getting a strong sense from you that this is very much about a personal journey through STEM, and you're doing masses to affect a lot of people and an industry. You're having this huge impact there, but you're only having this massively effective impact in the industry because you are always taking care of your journey through this, making sure that you're feeling confident, that you're giving your best, that you're developing your expertise, and that you're giving, like, even in terms of outreach, like your best. And whether that's STEM or not STEM, that is such a crucial message. This idea of really be your personal best.
Yes.
Because that's whatever you choose to do,
yeah,
you will succeed.
Yeah, it's so important, even for people who are not, in the STEM space. You will always have to do what's right for yourself. And, it's a cliche thing to say, but when students are picking subject choices or wanting to understand what is good profession wise, you have to pick something that you're passionate about. And it's easier said than done. But yeah, I've always tried to sort of stay true to that, because I have picked things in the past or chosen certain avenues to explore and stuff. And when, it gets really difficult and things, you go back to that juggling ball analogy, you add another ball in or something like that, and you start to realize what is really important for yourself. And I have learned the hard way sometimes, but that's why I like to talk about it, because that's what I've taken away from this entire process, and definitely something that, resonates with yourself. So I'm glad that message came out.
Yeah, so I guess last question from me. We hear a lot about passion, and it's very clear that you have found yours and you're applying yourself to what you really love. But what does, when you're in your teens and, you're just starting out on your journey, what does it feel like to know what your passion is? Because I think sometimes we're just starting out. So many things interest us, and we have such a lack of familiarity about so many things. It can be overwhelming to really know what passion feels like. So what are the earliest moments of this is what I want to do?
Yeah,
feel like
finding that feeling. Gosh, I don't think there's any right or wrong way on how it should feel. I definitely don't feel for the students of today looking and having the resources that they have at their disposal, you know, LinkedIn, TEDx, they're shedding insights into very, very niche areas of science and tech that you wouldn't necessarily know of. So the sheer variety that the young generations have of today is hugely overwhelming. I think the thing that I can sort of recommend is what I found when I was going through school, and there was something that clicked in chemistry, or something that I was like, oh, that's really cool, really fascinating. I found myself on top of all the revision that you do, and it's such an intense time that you're going through, I was sort of looking into little things. I remember one particular one was an aerogel, or a particular type of material lattice structure that meant it was the lightest material known to man. And the thing that got me, it was just simply in a presentation at school, it was a picture of like a little cubic volumetric piece of material sitting on top of a flower. You're nodding your head because I'm sure you've seen the same picture, but and the petals just standing there, and it's got this little thing. And I was like, what is that? And I didn't really ask in school, but I went home and Googled it and had a look. And then I suddenly found myself down this rabbit hole of chasing things and realizing that actually this lattice structure is a type of material, and what made it useful. And then I started realizing, wow, if I can learn something about this, then I realized materials make up everything. I could sort of get into the world of materials and work on spaceships or cars, or get people renewable energy. You know, it spans so much. So I think it started to click when I was researching it at home, but other individuals may find that they have a particular hobby, or I grew up with a lot of girls who are sportswomen, loved netball, loved tennis, or something like that, and they probably, whatever subjects they did at school, it didn't quite click. But what I would say is that there's always a science or avenue behind that hobby that makes it to what it is today. And whether it be the development of a tennis racket, or understanding the LTA, the Lawn Tennis Association, how that works as a corporation, there's always masses and masses of people and experience and sectors and skill sets required behind every one of your hobbies. And so that is quite a nice way to sort of combine what you're learning into what you're passionate about. There are always sort of interlinking factors. So don't get hung up on what it feels like to be passionate about it, but I guess sort of start to explore those things that are familiar to you, because you're probably more likely to immerse yourself in that. Yeah, but it's a tricky question, and there's more than one option, I'm sure. Don't worry if something doesn't work out. That's what I would say.
Well, I think both of us probably share the same experience, that we followed our curiosities.
Yeah.
And like going round a maze, sometimes you hit a bit of a dead end, and you kind of went back on yourself and then tried something else, and all of that's fine. It's all perfectly acceptable, because it's all about, again, that self-discovery and like knowing where to apply yourself, and just putting one foot in front of the other, and doing it all with joy. And I think I think that we can often hear this whole thing about passion, and we see someone who's massively successful like yourself and going, but I'll never get there. But stripped down to the bare essentials, it seems like you are where you are today because you really followed your curiosity and you just kept going. And I think that is where that is where we'll leave this conversation, and where I think the biggest take-home message is that, you know, you are someone who has just really followed their heart, their curiosity, the intrigue you talked about, and it's led you to doing what you are doing today. And it's just like amazing, massively.
Oh, thank you. That means so much. It means so much. I've had such an awesome conversation today. Some really interesting, important topics that are not talked about often, bizarrely. I do a lot of these interviews, and I think we've covered some topics that are really going to resonate with people. And yeah, I thank you for having the opportunity to talk about them with.
Oh, thank you, Ella. Thank you for sharing. And on that note, there are so many different podcasts that you have been on. There's been a burst of, you on the sort of media scene, which is amazing, because if you do want to find out more about Ella and all the incredible things that you've done and achieved, which I haven't even touched on, please do keep sort of searching for all the different things that are out there that tell your story. And thank you so much for being so transparent and honest with me today. It's been amazing to hear you. Thank you.
It's been amazing.
Thanks for listening, and please do subscribe to this podcast and maybe even rate and review it if you can. The more ratings and reviews, then the more interest from those trusty algorithms, which could help to increase the reach of this show. And you can watch the video recording of this conversation on YouTube for my new series called eSTEAMd Women. It's all about self-discovery and self-evolution on innovation. So as always, be kind and loving to yourselves, and I wish you all a great week.